Hello, and welcome to Bygones by the Bay, the show where we revivify historical sites, landmarks, and people from right here in your backyard, the greater Bay Area. I'm your host, Connor Kaleem, and today we're going to be exploring two fascinating historical sites that were once thriving locations, but now in ruins. First, we're going to look at the sinking town of Drawbridge, located at the south of the San Francisco Bay, near San Jose. We're also going to look at the once magnificent and widely visited, elegant pools of the Sutro Baths in current-day Land's End. But first, Drawbridge. And to help us explore and learn more about this site, we have in studio our guest, Anita Goldwasser, who's writing a book currently with Seal Craig titled Sinking Underwater, a Ghost Town's Amazing Legacy. And with her, we have Mary Deshane, who is a program administrator at the San Francisco Bay Wildlife Society. Mary, Anita, thank you very much for coming into the studio and speaking with us today. So we're going to show our viewers a slideshow that shows them what Drawbridge looked like back in its heyday. And while that's showing, Anita, if you could just give me a general historical overview of Drawbridge, that would be great.
Drawbridge was established way back in about the 1880s, and it came to being only because two very wealthy men in San Francisco wanted to build a railroad from the East Bay down to Santa Cruz. And the Drawbridge Island, which was called Saline Island at the time, was in the way. So there was a lot of boat traffic around the island, and they needed to construct a drawbridge at each end of the island so that the boat traffic and the trains did not interfere with one another. They hired a man who would operate the bridge, and he had friends who stayed with him, and they realized that the whole area around the train station was full of wonderful wildlife. The fishing was abundant, and ducks were just all over the place. And his friends would come and stay with him a couple of days, and then they'd go home and think, you know, let's build a house there, and we'd spend a lot of time on Drawbridge. So the first people who built homes there were basically hunters. And gradually their families would see what was going on, and the families would come and families would build houses. But in between, the hunters would come, and you know, there might be hundreds of them there coming on a weekend, and there's not enough room for them to stay. So they built what they called duck houses. There were two-room buildings where they had one room as bedroom and the other room kitchen. And the hunters congregated there on the weekends. Mm-hmm. Then their families wanted to live there or spend time there on the weekends, so the families started building houses. And pretty soon, Drawbridge began to grow and grow. But it was not really an easy place to live because there were no amenities at all. The island that Drawbridge was on was basically a marsh. The only solid land was the railroad tracks that went through from north to south. And so they had to figure out, you know, what can we do to make the land usable? And they built houses on stilts because since it was a marsh, everything was sinking. And periodically, the whole time that Drawbridge existed, they were constantly raising the houses and sometimes shoring up the railroad tracks.
And so what was, because it was so difficult to get resources in and out, what was everyday life like for the citizens of Drawbridge?
Very difficult because they had no place where they could shop. There were no stores, no churches, no schools, no amenities at all. And if they needed groceries, they had to go down to Alviso, which was a 3-mile hike on railroad tracks. Or if they were lucky, there might be a train going along down there, and then they'd have to get the items back. And if they had to buy a stove, if that got to be an even bigger problem, you know, they would probably get it shipped by freight to the train station and then figure out how to get it from the train to their home. So between all the houses, they had boardwalks. Mm-hmm. They had boardwalks between the houses, but mostly every house had a boardwalk leading it up to the station or to the tracks.
Wow. And so because it was isolated, I'm curious to learn about how it was perceived by surrounding cities or people in outside towns?
It was perceived in a very negative sort of way. Somehow or other, newspapers got the impression that the people who lived there were all deadbeats, criminals, just no good people. And so that was the impression that everybody had. And it was, of course, very untrue, because the people who lived there were business people, doctors who practiced in San Francisco, even a county supervisor.
And Mary has the picture of a photographer that took a portrait of some of the people. If Mary or Anita, if you could speak to the picture, why it was taken, and some interesting points in it.
Yeah, that picture shows how well dressed the people were who came to Drawbridge. And they looked like they were upper society almost, and they would come and carry very nice suitcases and go home a few days later with all the ducks that they had shot in this suitcase. And they just were good people.
So it was thriving and an operating society. What was the demise in Drawbridge?
It was a very slow demise. Drawbridge was very isolated, but it was in the heart of what we now call Silicon Valley. And as all the cities in Silicon Valley grew, they dumped their waste into the water. The canneries dumped their waste into the water, and pretty soon the Drawbridge's water supply was destroyed. It was just totally polluted for so many reasons. And then to top it off, in the 1930s, there were salt ponds. Several big salt companies had salt ponds all around Drawbridge, blocking fresh water from reaching the town. So it got to the point where there were no places to hunt because the animals didn't come to Drawbridge because they had no food. And it was just like a vicious circle, basically.
And then also with the critical reception of the newspapers around, did they, as time progressed, how did they portray Drawbridge? And wasn't there some talk about vandals or an abandoned city when in fact it wasn't?
Yeah, they depicted the Drawbridge residents as basically no good criminal types and lazy bums and just undesirable people. And of course this was totally untrue, but that was the impression that they gave. And some people say, well, they did that to sell more newspapers, but it also tended to destroy Drawbridge.
But did that promote vandals coming in when there were still citizens?
Yes, because they gave the impression that everybody had left Drawbridge and the houses were abandoned and people had left good, expensive things there.
Right.
And so, of course, the Vandals came and thought, oh, well, we could just go in and take anything we want. And that's what was happening. People would live in a house, and they'd be sitting and eating, and the bullets would suddenly come through the kitchen window. And so it was really a terrible situation.
And I'm interested to know if there was any holdouts, if everybody just left at once, or if there were certain families or a person who was the last family or person of Drawbridge.
It was a very gradual situation. By 1930, the hotels had gone. I think one of them was on fire and burned. Fires were a big problem there. And the other one closed because of lack of people staying there. Hunters felt, why come there if there's no more wildlife, no more ducks, no more fish? So, why go there? We can go someplace else.
Right.
During the time that it was thriving, there were a few really interesting characters. Do you remember Nellie?
Oh, Nellie, yeah. Nellie Dolan was a woman everybody knew. She was way in advance of her time. She hunted, she fished, she knew everybody in town. And she had so many tales to tell about life in Drawbridge.
Wow. Was she the mayor, or what was her role? Was she just a citizen of Drawbridge?
She was just a citizen.
Wow. Wow. And was there any stories particularly from her?
My favorite story was when she was 18 years old. She came from Oakland with her boyfriend on a night train, and they wanted to get off at Drawbridge and visit her father. And as they were traveling toward Drawbridge, she commented to the conductor, we're going to get off in Drawbridge and see my father. And he said, oh, the train isn't stopping at Drawbridge tonight. And she said, well, it has to stop. my father's waiting for us. He said, what we can do is slow the train down, and you can yell out of a window and tell your father to meet you in Alviso. And that's exactly what happened. But it was a very complicated sort of thing where she and another passenger got off, and they sent a hand truck with the father and one of the railroad men down to Alviso. And he picked up this pregnant woman and with Nellie, brought them back on the hand truck.
Wow.
And the two men had to walk the 3 miles back
Wow.
to
Yeah.
Drawbridge in the dark.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And so I'm also curious, and Mary, I'll ask you, fast forward to present day. So what's happening now on the site of Drawbridge and around Drawbridge?
So Drawbridge had a couple of hotels. It had several gun clubs for people that came and visited to have basically a recreational outing. And during its heyday, there were a lot of parties there. They would have big 4th of July celebrations. And there was a community in the north that was the highfalutin group, and the community in the south that didn't talk to them so much. And it had a lot of character and a lot of individuals, and that's covered in the book. It's a lot of the personal histories of these people and how they survived. And towards the end, they had to keep shoring up their structures because actually with the use of the groundwater, the land was sinking. And with all the pollution from the effluent coming into the bay and the cutting off of the tidal waters with the levees around the salt ponds, it just was getting to be pretty nasty out there. So in 1974, there was a proposal to save the South Bay as a national wildlife refuge. And Don Edwards, who was the congressperson at that time, put it through Congress and had it established as one of the national wildlife refuges in the system under the Department of the Interior. So there's about 500 of those in the country that are established to save land and habitat for wildlife. And the Don Edwards San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge is the group that we are supporting. We're a nonprofit, and the Wildlife Refuge manages the land for endangered species and preserved habitat, and it's been significantly cleaned up and will be continue to be restored to wildlife habitat due to the support of the people in this area.
Yeah, and so if people want to learn more about Drawbridge as well as visit or see the site, what can they do or how can they learn more?
Well, it's illegal to go out to the site. It is part of a protected land, but we do have talks and tours with slideshows and lots of fun information that you can learn about through our website, which is www.sfbws.com, standing for San Francisco Bay Wildlife Society. And on our website, you can, actually you can do /Drawbridge, it'll take you right there, and then it'll show you the activities. So you can sign up to go on a tour. They're very popular.
Okay.
Seal Craig, our board president, conducts those tours, and she's the co-author of the book.
Beautiful. Awesome. That's good information. And so with that, that's all the time we have for the Drawbridge portion of the show. So I thank you, Mary, and I thank you, Anita, very much for coming on the show and sharing your experience and knowledge of Drawbridge with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And now we're going to be diving into the Sutro Baths. But in the meantime, we talked about what Drawbridge was. Now we're going to show you what Drawbridge is. So take a look at these photos. Now we're going to be diving into the once magnificent, elaborate, glass-enclosed entertainment complex known as the Sutro Baths in current-day Land's End. And to help us explore this site, we have in studio with us today a Sutro Baths enthusiast from San Mateo, Farrah Pace. Farrah, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Connor.
Absolutely. And we're going to show our viewers what it looked like from within the Sutro Baths. And while we're playing that video, Farrah, I'm going to ask you if you could introduce Sutro Baths and just give us a general historical overview.
Certainly. So, Sutro Baths was at the time the largest bathworks in the world. It was kind of created and built by a tycoon in San Francisco named Adolf Sutro. It was built in 1894, opened to the public in 1896, and like I said, this was something unlike anything on the earth. It was the largest bathworks in the world. So it contained 7 different pools of varying depths, sizes, and temperatures. It was mostly salt water except for one. I mean, this thing was enormous. Constructed of glass, iron, concrete, wood. It had 100,000 square feet of glass. And I want to say 3.5 million feet of lumber. So
Wow.
this was a big
Wow.
building.
So what the financier and originator of it was Adolf Sutro. What inspired him to build this bathhouse?
Certainly. So Adolf
What's
Sutro,
his story?
Yeah, his story is pretty fascinating. He was an immigrant from Prussia. He came from Prussia in 1850 at the age of 20. And really, he was an engineer. So he helped out building mine shafts and ventilation shafts at the Comstock Lode in Nevada, the large silver mine, and really made a fortune there. At a certain point, he moved to San Francisco, and he did something interesting. He bought large tracts of land in western San Francisco. So at the time, around 1890, essentially barren sand dunes out in the western end of San Francisco, modern-day Sunset and Richmond districts. And he made a lot of money developing that land. So he basically built a lot of properties. He owned Cliff House, which was a structure at one point. And his estate was in Sutro Heights, which is pretty adjacent. It's now Sutro Heights Park. And so he really just wanted to kind of share his wealth. He was a philanthropist. He was a good man at heart. So really wanted to share his fortune with the people of San Francisco.
And how was it received after it was finished, completed? How was it received by the public?
So it was...
Did people go there? Or?
Right. It was, from what I can tell, it was very popular. And what's interesting is that Adolf Sutro, he wanted it to be for everyone, not just the elite. So he made the prices very affordable. It was just a quarter to swim. And you were set up with a towel, soap, locker rooms. I mean, they had a bathing suit. They had 40,000 or 20,000 bathing suits, 40,000 towels. It was, if you just wanted to walk around and see the sights, it was a dime. He even built his own railroad to get from San Francisco to Sutro Baths, and that was a nickel. And so it was pretty popular by all accounts.
And so I'm interested to learn the process of the history of the Sutro Baths. When it was, how did it evolve? Was there any new attractions as it progressed?
Mm-hmm.
And then ultimately, what was the demise of the Sutro Baths?
Mm-hmm. Certainly. So, like I said, there were 7 pools, but there were other things as well. There was a museum. There was a theater that had ongoing productions of dramas and musicals. It was very exotic. So he had stuffed animals, polar bears, tigers. He had authentic Egyptian mummies. He had some of the collection of P.T. Barnum's circus, some Ripley's Believe It or Not, kind of early editions of mechanical arcade games. And like I said, it was only a dime to just walk around and do these things. 3 restaurants that could seat 1,000 diners total. So, I mean, you could spend a day or a weekend there. It was really something special. And they advertise it as a tropical beach, because what's interesting, you can't really swim in San Francisco, the water's too cold. But this was a place where everyone could come and swim indoors. And it was humid and tropical, so they had all these plants and ferns. And it really was a paradise in a sense.
Do you think something like this would be successful today, or would even be viable today?
I should hope so. And I think Adolf Sutro, modern Silicon Valley tycoons could take a page from his book, because he wanted something that could be enjoyed by everyone, a public space that everyone could enjoy. So I really do hope that something like that could exist nowadays.
Were there attractions or entertainment similar to the Sutro Baths in San Francisco, or even in other parts of the country at the time? Do we know that?
Well, yeah, I can't stress this enough. It was one of a kind in the world. The largest bathworks, anywhere, and in the public baths, it wasn't an unknown concept at the time. It may seem a little strange to us, but it was a Victorian era idea. But it was pretty unique in the area. And so, unfortunately, over the time, it was very expensive to maintain.
Right.
There was dwindling attendance. At one point in 1937, they installed an ice rink to kind of salvage attendees. But by the 1950s, it was sold by his grandson, Adolph G. Sutro, to George Whitney, an entrepreneur who also owned Cliff House and Playland at the beach. But it just wasn't getting enough foot traffic. So in 1966, it was sold, and it was set to be demolished for a modern condominium. Interestingly enough, it caught fire in the early stages of demolition and burned down. Now, many people think that this was intentional arson collected for insurance money. But the funny thing is since it burned down and was acquired by the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, which is a part of the National Park Service, it's now free for everyone to see, versus being kind of kept to whoever owned the condominium.
It almost, going back to the origination, it's interesting to me because Sutro was at a time in his life when he had made his wealth, and he was in the philanthropy phase of his life. And you had stated the dates, but he died shortly after it was erected, correct?
Yes, it was built, opened to the public 1896, he died 1898.
Right, and with the extravagant materials and attractions and all of the machinery, it seemed like a momentous, just very expensive project, and then he only charged a price that could attract the common man. Is this almost his dream and not even necessarily a viable, operable attraction or entertainment? I'm curious to take your opinion on whether this was just something he wanted to build and provide for as a public good, or if he had really envisioned it to be viable business.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think Adolf Sutro at heart was a generous man. He wanted to be open to the public. He wanted to share his wealth. And in the long run, it wasn't viable, frankly. That's what led to its demise. But he also operated the third kind of iteration of the Cliff House. He opened up his private estate to people to walk his gardens. So it really was just sheer goodwill on his part. And so even if it was just a brief time, it was a pretty beautiful vision, and that's what attracted me to the history in the first place.
It'd be similar to if like a Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg had invested in some dream project that essentially served as a public good for people today.
Exactly.
So what do you, overall, looking at the Sutro Baths, what do you think is the legacy of looking back at it now?
Well, like I said before, I think it's just not a lot of people know about it. You'll go to Sutro Baths and it's some concrete foundations, but if you kind of take some time to delve into this history, it's really a moving, beautiful vision of someone who's very blessed with wealth, trying to give back to the community. And I was actually reading a letter, a 1998 letter to the San Francisco Chronicle of a man who attended the baths in the 1930s, the Great Depression. And he said, I can remember to this day going there, taking the trolley to the baths, paying a quarter, getting my bathing suit and swimming with my friends all day. And it was a chance to kind of escape the the kind of the harsh reality of life during that time. So it's a pretty beautiful vision.
And what can people do now to look at the ruins and learn more about the Sutro Baths? I mean, is there still any remnants of the Sutro Baths themselves? What does it look like now?
Certainly. So it's concrete foundations, basically, of the main pools. The Golden Gate National Recreation Area does a good job of providing signage. There's a gift shop. There's a number of books on the subject. I believe a book recently came out in 2013 called Sutro's Glass Palace that kind of talks more about the history. But really, I think just paying the site a visit and appreciating his legacy is the best we can do.
Wow, very cool. I'm going to have to check it out. I've seen it. I've never been by there. But with that, that's going to wrap up this segment of the show. And I thank you, Farrah, for coming in and sharing your knowledge on the Sutro Baths.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's also going to wrap up our program for today. And I would like to thank all of the cast and crew that made this possible, as well as our guests, Anita and Mary and Farrah, to come in and speak about Drawbridge and the Sutro Baths. And of course, I'd also like to thank you, our viewers, to make this show possible. I hope it was an enriching and entertaining experience. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Bygones by the Bay, where Bay Area history lives on.